Hey everyone, welcome back. Today we're going to be approaching my maker coin. Well, unfortunately, it looks like an Oreo cookie to me, and that's kind of where it's at. Alright, we're going to go over the first attempt to it, and I will talk to you at the end of the video on my results. Alright, let's get into it. Let's cue the... Today I'm going to be using Fusion 360 to create the coin. Because it is a coin, I'm going to start off with a circle. Unfortunately, when I go to print this, I couldn't print it at the size that I wanted to print it. And ultimately, we're going to redesign this afterwards. But I'll get more into detail at the end of this video about that. Alright, for now, let's just start digging this in. So I pulled in my logo, the one I previously created off for another project that I've yet to ever finish. Whatever. Anyways, so here I'm working out the dimensions that I'm thinking would be ideal for the project that I'm doing. So, the ideal size for this coin, I guess you could say. And working out where and how to place my logo. Ironically, I forgot to say, are you joking? Time out, folks.
Call from Springfield, MA.
No, I'm not answering that, obviously.
Call from Springfield, MA.
I don't know anyone in that area.
Call from Springfield, MA.
Isn't timing awesome?
Call from Springfield, MA.
I don't even know why we have a landline. We never answer it. We never use it. So, anyways. What was it? Oh, yeah. Placing the logo, making sure it's level where I want it to be level. Because I didn't want to go above that little bevel there. Ultimately, that bevel is going to be one of my downfalls. I'm going to have to go back and deal with that at some point. And I'm probably going to just get rid of it altogether. Because it makes the coin that much harder to print. I thought it was a good idea, but ultimately, for the height that I have, it just isn't worth it. Yeah, so working like 2 or 3 composites or whatever components to get this right. Not composites, Brian. Components to get the 2 colors that I need. When you're working Fusion 360, this is actually a good way of doing it. Get all your components right. Even if you're going to be blending some of those components together at the end of the day. This way you're working on one piece at a time, and then you're going to be able to mesh them all together afterwards. As you can see here, I'm trying out a couple things, and ultimately I decided this just isn't going to work with the whole YouTube thing. So I decided just to stick with the title of the coin and line them up the best way I can with the tools I have available. I suppose if I really wanted to, I could have gone into another program and laid this out a different way. Say like Illustrator, and brought it in that way. But in reality, this gives me a timeline to work with, so I can go back to this afterwards and, well, change things around if needed. Alright. So I'm working at lining things up and getting things ready for extruding, and seeing how I may like things or may not like things. And working on placement of my logo and the layout of the back. Just trying to make sure everything's balanced, because it's kind of important. If you don't have the balance there, it's going to be a bit of a challenge. Alright, so what I'm doing in Illustrator now, I forgot I did this part, is I got a little decal that I wanted to work with, a little icon, I guess you could say. It's not really just a little thing, decorative thing. The idea was to help me with the printing process, so to cut down on the span of the print head. But I ended up having to spend a lot of time working with this, and I mean a huge amount of time. I had to redraw this, and I found that there were a few mistakes that were made. The spacing wasn't right, and the proportions weren't correct. So it took a lot to fix this. I had to go in, fix all my spacing, all my alignments, and all my sizes, and all my spacing. To me, this is a very important little detail, even if it is not noticeable, which it really isn't. It's really not that noticeable. But it is a critical aspect of things. The reason is that if you don't have that detail right, you're always going to have that feeling that something's wrong. Something's not quite right. Even where something like this, where it's going to be so small, it's not going to be really that noticeable. But, yeah, with that said, it is kind of too small to actually even be noticeable. But with that said, anyways, having all the dimensions and everything scaled properly, if you use this object for another project, you know what? That other project, it'll make that your life that much easier. Simple as that. It'll save you time on the back end. At the end of the day, you'll have saved yourself some time, especially if you plan on reusing this. And there's a good chance that I will end up using this over and over again over the span of time. I mean, I could be completely wrong there, and that's well and good either way. The fact that it's done, and it's done right, is very important. That's something, when you're an artist, that you have to be mindful of, is doing things correctly, making sure things will work for this project and possibly other projects. Because one thing I've learned working in the graphic design industry is that a lot of objects get reused to save time and to build consistency. And ironically, it's more about more about consistency is what I'm trying to say. So having this correct the first time saves you from fixing it the next time. Believe me, I've done many projects where either I wasn't given the time of day to fix things, and I had to hack my way through them, and then go through the same process again and again, because ultimately those weren't my decisions; those were somebody else's, saying just get it to print, don't care, just get it to work, don't care, you don't have time to do it the way you're supposed to do it, just do it and get it done, because in that person's eye, or that my boss's eye at the time was money, and time we didn't have available to make sure in the future things were right. So ultimately, in the long run, even though he probably never saw it, he used up more time in the long run by not fixing things right. But that's alright, it doesn't matter at this point, because this is for me. I want to make sure things are right for me, because that's important to me. Quality is very important. When it comes to design work, quality is very important. Your speed is also extremely important. You got to be able to do things efficiently and quickly, because you're working for clients, and clients only have so much tolerance for edits, changes, and things that need to be manipulated. That's one of the things that I know Adobe has been working on, is making a lossless progression in their design suite. Like with Photoshop, they've done a huge amount of work to allow you to work in a fashion that will not damage the original. And you can manipulate things in such a way that you don't have to worry as much of, or you don't have to be, not worry, but more fear of change, having to do changes. You don't have to be that afraid of changes as much as you used to be. You don't have to worry about what kind of changes that you're going to have to make and how can you preserve the integrity of that image. They've done a lot to do that. And Fusion 360 is because the nature of the type of program that it is, especially with the timeline, you're able to go back and make manipulations so you can make changes and adjustments without impacting your workflow. That is a beautiful thing. When I first started, none of that was in consideration. Making changes to something was a challenge at the end, because ultimately you weren't thinking about having to make changes. Nowadays, it is part of your consideration. It is part of your workflow to assure that you are able to make changes and not lose any quality or lose any time due to having to redo something because you didn't do it the way you needed to do it to make adjustments later on in the future. So when you're creating something, when you're working on stuff with that of any kind, you got to think ahead a little bit. Consider what you plan on using the thing for. Consider what your tools are going to be capable of doing and what is your end goal. And if that end goal, am I going to need to use this for another project? If that's the case, do I need to manipulate this in such a way that you're going to have to go back 3 steps? And that's all part of using the right program for the right job. I mean, that's why I pay for the Adobe Suite, because I know Photoshop, I know Illustrator like the back of my hand. I know how to work with them. I'm still learning Fusion 360, and ultimately, my goal is to know it enough where I can be comfortable saying, yeah, I know the program fairly well. I don't need to know the ins and outs of it. I'll never will need to know everything, because everything that I'm doing here is really mainly for the fun of doing it and the challenge. So that is where my interest lies. Now I'm adjusting the scaling and messing around with trying to get these in the location that I want, if that's what you're wondering what I'm doing here. Because I finally redrew everything, everything's balanced, and everything's laid out where I want it to be, as far as that little design piece goes. And now, ultimately, I need to extrude it and place it into the coin so it looks right. I need to make 2 separate objects, one that is a physical object and one for cutting out. And that's what I'll be doing next here in the step. Now, with that said, I am literally going to be able to go back in time and make some adjustments, which is going to be exciting. Well, that's what we're going to be doing next, is going back and making some serious changes. And with those serious changes, they're not going to be all that hard because of the lossless progression technology and being able to go back in time to make changes and having that impact your future. So see, right here, I did something stupid, and unfortunately, I couldn't go back and fix it. I deleted the component, or whatever they call it. Yeah, component, whatever. You know what I mean. So I ended up having to bring in, readjust, and realign. And actually, ultimately, because I did that, I like the end results better. I like how the placement of this ends up being, because it ends up cutting off where I think kind of neat. where it cuts off into that little bevel. So it's kind of fun having it that way. And it's making the logo as big as possible. So that's something to keep in mind. Something as a happy accident that I never thought I thought of until I actually saw it when I did it. So that's pretty cool. Okay. But with that said, I'm almost done laying out the coin and getting it ready for print. Just so if you're wondering, this took me a few hours to do. I'd say about 3 hours and then another 3 to print it or something like that. A good amount of time. But in the end, it was really worth the effort. I learned a lot by doing this, and that is ultimately what we're doing here, is learning together, exploring. So, but I still am going to need to go back and make some adjustments. I do plan on, once I have the coin laid out correctly and things looking good, I do plan on making it into a keychain, as well as maybe like a single SD card carrying case or something crazy like that. We'll see, only the future will tell. So, alright. As I'm nearing the end here, as you see, that little piece didn't cooperate very well with me. Yep. A little bit of cleanup, a little bit of adjustments. And bringing everything down to 2 different components. So I can export everything out the way I want it to be exported out. All right. So I'm exporting out the STL file. Getting it ready to print. This is where I make my critical mistake on this. Getting the 2 things ready. No, I guess it never printed the boot shield. Ultimately, you'll see me go back several times trying to adjust things. Now you see, this is where I realize my text is just too small to work properly. And what you're looking at there is the offset of my print head. Sorry, I was making a quick little tweet to let you guys know what I was up to. Yeah. I might as well leave that in, I guess, since I'm talking about it. Something fun. I mean, if you're not having fun, what's the point? I keep running into little problems. That's why you see me stopping and making some adjustments, because it wasn't sitting the way I wanted it to sit on the plate. So yeah. And off we go, running again. Alright, yep. This goes on for a few minutes at the end of the day, but I do get this printed just so you know. Obviously, if I'm going to be talking about it in a second. A lot of this has to do with scaling and things of that nature. That's where I'm running into some weird problems. I really wasn't thinking very well when I was planning this out as far as printing goes. All right, let's take a look at the coin and